Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves. Hope everybody had a great week, and we are here, and we've got some fall colors going on there. The fall colors are almost all over. We're getting some seasonably cooler weather. Hey, Lori. Hey, Eva. Um, Thank you for coming. I want to do the usual reminders, the notifications. You can like the Leather Elves on Facebook. That way you get notifications. And check the Leather Elves Facebook page. That way you can catch any sales, pop-up sales, things like that, events that we publicize. You can also follow us on Instagram, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So we also have still going on the Foraging Flock. This is a membership group that we've met once already. We're going to meet again November 20th, so there's still time to catch this month's. It's a year-long membership, and we talk about foraging, enrichment. It's a great group of companion parrot owners who and some folks who have rescues, some folks that are pet owners, and it's really a nice group. And I hope that the people who have already joined are having some fun. So you can still, like I said, you can sign up. It's $100 for a year's membership. You get a free toy. You also get a free toy on your bird's hatch day, and there are sales that are exclusive to members only. So think about joining the foraging flock. We would love to have you join us. So tonight, my guest is someone who's got a little bit different perspective on things than what we usually talk about. And I want to introduce you guys to TJ Pluid. TJ, hello, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Doing good. So I'm going to read your bio because it's kind of impressive. TJ is a dedicated aviculturist with extensive experience in both zoological and private facility settings. His career in aviculture includes serving as a primary bird keeper at the Reed Park Zoo in Arizona, an AZA accredited institution, where he played a key role in bird care and management. He was raised in Idaho. He was deeply involved in private aviculture, specializing in pheasants, quail, grouse, and waterfowl. Currently at the Florida Avian Conservancy, TJ works with rare species including ocellated turkeys, pygmy geese, turacos, crown pigeons, pheasant pigeons, and fruit doves. He is contributing to the propagation of these really unique birds. And that's a cool collection. So
It keeps me busy.
so I think my favorite of all of those are the ocellated turkeys. They're just
They're stunning birds.
they're so gorgeous. So how are they to work with?
The females are wonderful to work with. They are pretty naturally tame and super calm. The males are have a lot of attitude and are a pretty dangerous bird to work with. I actually use lockout systems, so I'm not even sharing the same space with the male.
Wow. Can you explain the
Yeah.
lockout system? I think that's like some people aren't familiar
Yeah.
with that term.
So the way our breeding flock is set up is they have one massive central section, which is where I feed out the birds at, and then there's a smaller, separate, I guess, aviary connected to that. That's probably 20 feet by 20 feet, something like that. And it has a small availability of food and water, but basically that allows me. The male loves spending his time in there because it's kind of his domain, while everyone else
Mhm.
uses the entire habitat space. Um, but that allows me to quickly go in and close him into that section with a door. And then I can calmly, without having to look over my shoulder constantly and hold a bucket in front of me for safety, I can go through and clean bowls and feed and water and do maintenance inside the aviaries without getting attacked.
And that's important. I remember working with a black vulture, and actually, no, it was a turkey vulture. And he would every time you went in to clean, and he was housed with red tail hawks. And you would think that the red tails would kind of be the issue. They so weren't.
Right.
They were cool. They're like up on their swing and their perches and stuff, and they just kind of watch when you came in to clean or rake out the mews. The turkey vulture, the second you opened the secondary containment door, he would be,
Yeah.
like, at your calves, and you'd have, like, bruises all up and down your calves.
Mhm.
So, it's funny because they were talking about enrichment because what I did with that bird was I would stuff, leaves and put a mouse in the middle of a bunch of leaves in a paper bag, and then I
Right.
would toss that, and while he was dealing with that, I would, like, sweep out the mews and be done. So, yeah.
Quickly go
So
through.
exactly. So enrichment does have a really important role, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, so do you have what's your favorite species to enrich, that you've ever worked with?
Um, ever would, and it's funny you brought it up, would be king vultures. Just because there was so many different things you could do with their diets. I mean, I'd freeze them in
Mhm.
ice blocks, and they'd have to sit there and either drop the ice blocks on concrete, they'd knock it off a post or something and drop it to break it apart, or they would just patiently sit over it and wait, that kind of thing. Or I did the paper bags as well, or I'd even pile rocks on top of carcasses for them to kind of move the rocks around and pull out the parts. I would do the food inside of cages, like little wire cages that you see for like
Yeah.
treat balls and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I would fasten them to a branch, and that would give them actually the muscular action of them pulling apart a carcass like they would in the wild. And they're doing that to get their daily diet as well.
That's kind of a cool point. I mean, you and I were talking before we came on, about exercise and birds not being sedentary and getting
Right.
them to do those to have to work for it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's important for companion parrots. It's important for any animals in captivity, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. They should be moving
So,
more. They should be using those natural abilities that they already have.
yeah. And I think that's something, with companion parrot owners, I think one of the things we sometimes stray from is getting them moving, keeping them moving, not, we
Absolutely.
provide these wonderful setups for them, these great, palace cages and play stands, but we don't expect them to move a whole lot. And I think
Right.
that's crucial. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so having worked in zoos and facilities, I'm sure that you've had numerous discussions about animal welfare.
Yes.
And people get obviously there's the difference between animal rights and animal welfare that I just want to clarify before we go further. Um, Animal welfare is what we're shooting for. We're not shooting for animal
Right.
rights, we're shooting for animal welfare. Um,
Right.
so if you were to describe what good animal welfare looks like, what would it be?
Um, I guess the best way I could describe it from my experience would be like I start out with is the bird healthy to begin with, and go through all of your checkpoints of its overall health before you get into its environment that it's exposed to. Some of us have outdoor birds, some of us have indoor birds, but you can still, cater to an enriching environment to contribute to its welfare and its overall enrichment. Anyway, we're going to hear that word a lot tonight, but an enriched bird, it has good welfare for the most part. Is the size of its enclosure appropriate for its species? Are you catering to be able to let that bird move like it's supposed to? We want to just really focus on, if this bird was doing it in the wild, it should have at least the opportunity to do it in captivity.
Yeah, no, I think that really does kind of sum it up. And, for someone who's not in a facility, I think welfare is the same. It's not maybe you don't have the big outdoor enclosure, but you have, is the bird healthy? And I think it's important that people check on that, on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
So if when you're assessing your bird's health, what are the points you hit on?
The quick, just everyday look over is it holding its wings how it's supposed to? Are its feet moving like it's supposed to? Are its, even its toes moving like it's supposed to? Does it have clear eyes? Is it breathing fluently without any sound to it? If there's sound in the breathing, that's a big red flag. If there's any discharge nasally or from the eyes, anything like that. If it's not, I mean, we all know our birds as individuals, especially pet
Mhm,
owners. So we know their individual personality. Is it as active and personable as it always is, or is it being lazy and just sitting there? And change of personality can indicate a further problem going on. And I think
mhm.
people just think, oh, he's trying something new, and it's like, well, no, but why is he trying something new?
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember that, you know, our birds they're prey species, most of them, and
Right.
they mask illness. And so
Yes.
to say you really can't brush off that change in behavior or that change in personality because it's
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah.
That that you are aware of that. And I think, that's part of bird ownership or bird keeping
Yeah.
is being aware.
A
Um,
lot of them will present themselves with the masking. It can physically look like a perfectly healthy bird, but if it's had a drastic change in its habits, back to the question of why, it's
yeah,
probably masking. And it's just a
yeah,
matter of figuring out what it's masking.
absolutely. So enrichment and welfare definitely go hand in hand. Um,
Extremely.
the as far so a bird that's not enriched, a bird that's not getting enough enrichment. How do you assess that, TJ? How do you decide that, this bird needs this much, this bird needs that much? How does that happen?
Um, I like to get probably more nerdy than I need to get with it, but I'm a big buff on natural history. And so I compare it to its wild counterparts. And even though there's going to be some things different, I mean, some of our birds aren't flying all the time or covering mass
Mhm,
distances or all that, but you can compare to what that bird is doing in the wild and then transcript that over to what's it doing in our captive setting, and how can I kind of mesh those two together to kind of combine that behavior across either side. A wild bird should be doing what a captive bird should be doing, kind of thing.
mhm. So no, that's not nerdy at all because I can tell you, we talked about, the zoo world and stuff. And I can tell you going into zoos and having, and this is not a slight on the younger generation, because you're younger than I am, I know. And I know there are folks who are younger than you who are keeping
Right.
birds and keeping them well. But I've had, people say, oh, no, I don't wanna read up on that bird, I'll just check it out when it gets here. Wait, what?
Yeah, that baffles me.
And the same with companion parrot owners, I think that it's so important for you guys who are bringing birds into your home, that you need to know where they're from, how do they flock, how do they forage, you know, um what do their calls sound like? I mean, that's a big one,
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
favorite is I want a quiet parrot. It's a dead one. It's a dead one.
Yeah.
It's that whole Monty Python skit about the dead parrot. That's the
Yes.
quietest one. So, I really think, doing that research. And so, okay, let me ask you this as a younger
Uh-huh.
person. Um, what's your sources of information? Where do you go? So when somebody says, TJ, we got this new bird that we're going to bring into the facility, or how would
Right.
you like to have this bird, whatever. Where do you go for information?
So I am big on books, for one reason or another. I really just like them. Um, but so my opinion on it is, with diving into the natural history side, um, that takes out a bias. Because if you're reading a husbandry manual, that's just what that specific person deems appropriate. But when you're
Mhm,
reading about, natural behaviors documented in the wild, then you're going to be able to cater in your own mind of how to translate that to your bird, and how best fits your facility or your home or whatever.
mhm.
So I do a lot of reading out of, like, monographs from wild observations and things like that. With the internet, there's a lot more opinion out there, and I don't know if that's always the best thing, because
Same.
there's less research available to the normal person, because a
Mhm,
lot of that is deemed to just go to, like, college students and other researchers, and it's kind of a closed knit group. But if you're just to go to, like, a natural history observations, even if they were written 100 years ago, the birds are still using those same behaviors in the wild. And so I like just being able to cater that what is available to us as far as natural history books go, and then translate that into the captive setting.
I mean, I my one of my favorite, and it's a go-to, and I'm looking at my bookcase right now, Parrots of the World. I mean, for companion
Yeah.
parrot owners, I think that's you go there first, it gives you the down and dirty, here's the basics, and then you kind of expand from there.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it, and especially so Carrie Ellen says, "Get a cockatoo." No, she knows better. She knows
I'm not listening
I
to
think
her on
she's
that
being
one.
sarcastic. I'm gonna go with it, she's being sarcastic. Um,
Yeah.
but, you know, people that come in, "Oh, I want a bird that's green. I want a bird that's red." Do you have any and you've gotta do your research. I mean, and because
Right.
then from there, it goes to, that so how do I enrich this bird's life? I mean,
Yeah.
y you're in Florida, so you have
It
a better
opens the
chance.
door to teach yourself more.
Absolutely, and, I mean, being in Florida, you have a much better opportunity to create a more naturalistic environment than I do in Pittsfield, Maine,
Right.
because, like, in about a minute, it's gonna probably start snowing, but, um, God, I'll be down in a little bit,
Yeah.
but, so you look at the natural history, and then where do you go from there when you're creating enrichment? What's the next step?
So the easiest next step would be, to what that bird eats in the wild, because so many people are going to tell you, oh, this species can eat this pellet. Well, yeah, that's true, probably, but what should it be eating, and what would it be eating in the wild environment? And
Mhm,
it can actually teach you a lot more than what you already thought you knew about those species, even if you thought you were well versed in them and had been keeping them before. It can just open up a lot of doors. But then it also, natural history really dives into the behaviors you should be eliciting to and trying to get out of your birds from the enrichment.
mhm. Absolutely, and I think that's I've talked about this on numerous, live streams that having a goal, uh, Nancy Forrester, Nancy ha is get a copy. No, Nancy, you can't give them away on this live stream, I've told you that before. So, and Carrie then says that snow is enrichment.
She's
I
right,
love my
though.
Florida. True, it is true, but, I love my Florida posse, but let's be kind, okay? Um Well, the whole, dietary piece, I think, yes, in my opinion, the bird should know that pellet is a food source, right? That just
Right.
so when something like Milton hits and you can't get fresh or whatever, you've got
Right.
something that they will eat. Um,
Yeah.
but so where do you stand on super diversity? Like, so I I mean, I we worked with a woman years ago, who was like, "I'm gonna give a bird 100 different food items in a year," and I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "'Cause it's
Right.
diversity, and that's important." So, what's your feeling on that?
I agree with the importance of a diverse diet, but I don't think we need to go that extreme with it. If you can and you want to, then more power to you. But that can be kind of exhaustive, and uh, to a point, when a bird's getting something new dietary every day, is it still enriching if it's always something new?
Yeah.
Um, so you basically, what I like to do is have a staple part of its diet, and then, and it doesn't even have to be every day add something new, but occasionally add another level to their diet. Like crown
Mhm.
pigeons, we feed a pelleted and grain diet, but every once in a while I'll give them a piece of banana or something like that, and they absolutely love it. But I'm not going to do it consistently because they start
Right.
expecting it, and it's not enriching at that point anymore. And that's kind
Yeah.
of the fruit part of their diet in general for us, anyway. Um, if we don't give it super often, then it's more enriching when they do get it, and it's more, it just, they like it a lot more if it's not a consistent part of their diet.
Right.
So
Do
we should have
you
a base to work.
Right. Do you try to stick with things that they might come across in their natural environment?
um to an extent, it that depends a lot on the species in question. A lot of them we have, a pretty varied diet for, that we provide anyway, but it's not necessarily equivalent to their natural diet.
Mhm.
It is, but not in exact terms. And
Right.
so we usually, with breeding birds, once we find something that works, we stick with that, and that basically becomes the staple part of their diet. And we add above and beyond on top of that would be the enrichment factor. And so,
Right.
like, a crown pigeon does eat a lot of fruit in the wild, but that's going to be seasonal for them, and it's going to change seasonally to what's available to them. But they're always eating some part of animal proteins or insect proteins in the wild, and always getting grains of some sort in the wild. So that is our base, and then the fruit would be above and beyond that.
Okay. Yeah. Because I mean, my thoughts have, I've gone back and forth, and I definitely agree with a diverse diet. But part of it too for me is when you're giving things that they would never ever encounter in the wild. It's
Right.
not it's completely out of the realm. And I re- I remember years ago teaching a class and having some primate keepers there, and they were giving the lowland gorilla blue Jello because it was
Yeah.
fun to watch them play with it, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm all for novel," and I agree the
Right.
same thing with parrots. I'm all for trying new things with parrots, giving them but when it's something so far out of the realm, I don't know.
Yeah.
I
It,
I kinda
it's
have an
I'll leave it up to the individual for that one.
yeah, yeah, I just and I think, it's a matter of if we're gonna go along that line where we're gonna start with that natural history and try to work from there. There are certain things that you're not gonna
Right.
offer. Um,
Right.
so what about using enrichment to elicit natural behaviors? What kinda stuff are you doing with that?
So with that, I call it furniture. I don't know why, but I do. Perching, different kinds of perching opportunities, even obstacles in the enclosure. Like, a lot of things, you can put
Mhm,
a stump in there, and they're either gonna, be working their time going around the stump or going out of their way to avoid it, or they're gonna be jumping
mhm,
up on it or flying up on it. And that's a behavior you're gonna see in most species in the wild, of what they would do with that kind of interaction. Rocks, things like that. That's harder to do in Florida. So, but in other environments, I've done a lot of, like, different rock work things, and that just, get them moving in a way that's natural to them. Now, if it's a species that's only surrounded by, like, marshland and sand, then doing a rock obstruction or a stump obstruction isn't going to be as conducive to that. So
mhm.
Nick just pulled up the photos of a before and after what I do. Sometimes I let
Right.
the weeds go crazy, and the birds love it. It's like a dense and jungle environment. and then I'll go through and pull all of them in the same day and basically get it down to just the intended plants that were put in that aviary for the bird. But then in that the super dense foliage is enriching for the birds, but they shouldn't live in it all the time. And the
Mhm.
super barren, sparsely planted is also enriching for them, but they deserve to have the option between the two, not necessarily at their will, but alternate it for them and just
Well,
give the
and I think
opportunity of.
and that goes with, it's foliage is not always the same in the wild. You've
Right.
got it's not always gonna be the same density. It
Yeah.
changes seasonally. And I
Yeah.
think with parrots, people keeping parrots at home, I think it's giving them natural browse, giving them, that natural, browse, branches, things like that,
Right.
allowing them time to be behind that. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
kind of a it's an off-show space, so that
Yeah.
they can have some, privacy, if you will. Um,
Yeah.
I remember going to Walt Fry's aviary. Walt was, breeding red vents, and I went to
Okay.
his place, and he had big, tall stumps and grass all over, and they were just utilizing the whole space. And I think
Yeah.
in a companion parrot setting, I think it's a matter of creating that dynamic. If a bird is in the cage, or if a bird's out on a play stand, you can still create that dynamic in that
Yeah.
kind of setting. Um,
Yeah, you just have to be creative and cater it to your own specific needs that you have in your home or in your aviaries.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important fact too, is that we need to talk about being realistic, that,
Yeah.
what you can do with your aviaries, maybe somebody can't do in their apartment with their cockatiel cage. It's
Right.
not the same, but it's kind of like life goals, or,
Yeah.
you can as much as you can possibly do, doing
Yeah.
your best. So,
Yeah.
um, so as far as when you're presenting, let's talk more about your categories. What you
Uh-huh.
Nick, can we pull up the slide with the categories? I know that you've got so talk to us about these different, because and people who have heard me speak know that I use different categories, but let's talk about these for you.
Yeah, and we were talking about that before this started. Everyone can have their own breakdown of categories, basically. This is what I use mostly because it's what I've been taught to use, and my knowledge is the combined knowledge of several other people and my experiences and things like that. So this is what I break it down to what I most enjoy enriching the birds with. And being a breeding facility, this is just it's a more sensible way to do it to me. So locomote, which you described as exercise, and it's the same thing to me. And that can be the furniture change we were talking about, the opportunity for them to fly, or run on the ground if it's a species that does that. Open water for waterfowl or shorebirds, they want to swim and have the room to do that. But you need to be able to specify it to your bird's needs of exercise, basically. Um,
Mhm,
So and even with the densely planted versus the openly planted, well, that when it's densely planted, it's giving them, obstacles to go in and out of, and they're using a whole different group of muscles than that open environment where they're just flying to and from.
mhm.
So that's another one specific to each place, but basically it's get your bird exercising, and that doesn't mean in our head, put it on a treadmill. Obviously, that's not a thing, but how can you change its environment to get it moving as much as possible? That's not in a stressful way.
Yeah, and I think, like working with birds of prey, there's a facility up here in Maine that does, they have their mews open up onto a center circular, area. It's an open area, but they've got walls that are, a certain height, and a bird will fly along and then have to get lift to go over that wall. And it's really
Yeah.
to build, that muscle, and to get them, using those muscles that they might not be using in human
Right.
care. um, and Douglas mentions, he says, most of you are lucky to have the temperature to do this, but in Canada, they have cold winters, so they must be kept inside. And large aviaries are expensive to heat. And absolutely, Douglas, I feel your pain up here in Maine. I can tell you. But there's still things we can do, in an aviary. It's sometimes just hanging a barrier. I don't know if you've ever done that, TJ. Just I've
Yeah,
hung like struts or seagrass mats, and it's a visual barrier, but it's also a physical barrier. And I think that promotes that exercise.
yeah.
Um,
Even if you're limited to that small space indoors, you can provide your own way to give them obstacles, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, as far as from a companion parent point of view, um, Sarah says, "If anybody knows cold winters, it's you." Idaho gets pretty unforgiving. So
Yes.
so you've got that experience. So, Douglas, we're not talking to somebody who's always been a sun worshiper. We'll just, he's got the cold
I
experience.
just am now.
There you go. He will never be back, I'm sure, but, he's got that experience. So, um, the one of the things, that when we were talking about the obstacles and things like that, it's easy. We create this really easy, wonderful, comfortable, environment. And, if we're going to go back to that natural history book again,
Right,
that's not necessarily what they're used to.
right.
Um,
And you get a lot of
so,
brain stimulation, which and the same for humans too. When you're exercising and challenging yourself more, it's stimulating your brain and things like that.
mhm. So Douglas says they also have less insects. It's true. It's Do we? Well, we don't have as big. Ours aren't as big. I think that's the
Yeah,
thing.
they
And
won't
so they
carry
try
away
to do as
the
much. They're not going to kill you, the ones up here,
bird.
anyway.
Yeah.
But so giving them as much foraging as possible, I think that's another. It's a
Right.
great thing to do. So what kind
And
of
to
things are you doing with your guys as far as foraging is concerned?
that, so on top of the dietary enrichment by changing the diet, I will work with some galliforms which love foraging over a large area and scratching through the ground. So instead of putting the food neatly in its bowl for it each day, just take that same measured amount of whatever species you're doing and throw it. Just put
Yeah.
it all over, so they have to work and go around all their obstacles, their plants, their stumps, or their perches, even whatever your environment dictates. But they're moving to go get that food instead of sitting in one spot to get that food. You can
Mhm.
also do things like foraging trays, which I have two kind of mentally different ones that I've worked with. One of them is like the toy version for dogs and cats you use, where they flip a little thing over and get one little piece of food out, and they go and flip another one and get another little piece of food. So those ones are available to pretty much everybody, and you can just set it up
Mhm.
for your bird in general. And another one I do is like, and don't do it as much here, but I would at the zoo. Is like taking, like, say for example, an all natural peanut butter and spreading it all over either a piece of cardboard, a pine cone, a piece of cucumber split open, or any flat-ish surface for them, and then I'll stick their diet to that, so they're kind of working over a bigger area, but they're also getting the
Mhm.
enrichment of this novel object that is holding their food instead of their standard bowl.
Right. And I think, so do you this is one of my big pet peeves is, that food bowls do move.
Yeah,
You can put them in different places. Do
yeah.
you have one spot where you feed, or do you sometimes move that around?
For most of them, it moves around to an extent. I mean, I could use a lot more of the habitat, but it rains so much in Florida that I don't want spoiled feed either and creating a mold spore in the aviary.
Yeah.
Um, but like the Taracos, they like eating off the ground. They would be foraging in the trees naturally. So
Mhm.
with the Taracos, there's pretty much just a standard shelf where they eat, and so they're pretty limited. But for most of the other species, the bulls do have a little bit more wiggle room on being moved around and what I can do with them.
So with the Taracos, do you ever tie like I'm envisioning I haven't seen your aviaries, but could you tie things up in the trees, like zip tie stuff up there for them to go up and forage for?
I definitely can. I don't do it a whole lot because a lot of the times when that's more easily done is going to be the same times that they're breeding, and we kind of want to create
Right.
less stress of me going in and out of the aviary itself because they're
Mhm.
not pet birds. They don't want me in with them.
Right.
But I definitely have the opportunity, and if you're somebody who has an outdoor aviary with a pet Tarako or a similar species, I would definitely encourage that. When I was at the zoo, we had like short little skewers that we could, skewer full of fruit and hang them up in the trees, and those were readily taken advantage of by many species.
They're one of my favorites. I mean, we make 2 toys that have them, as the base. We can't get them right now. They're not in stock anywhere. But skewers, like the straight ones, they're
Yeah,
amazing for this because then you can move them around an enclosure. You can move
yeah,
them around a cage, and the bird isn't always going to the exact same spot,
it
to get
opens up
that.
a lot more enriching opportunities for them.
Yeah. And you can put other things on those skewers too. If you've got a bird that, like a parrot that's gonna go through wood, you can put wood blocks on there. You can do all different
Yeah,
kinds of things. So skewers, I love them. I think they're very versatile,
yes,
and worth having. Um, so when you say dietary, because this was always a concern of mine. When I would say dietary, people would say, "So you want me to give them more food or just different food?" For me, dietary is more about presentation.
yeah.
What do you think?
My brain, I kind of see it as a double-edged sword. It's the presentation and the food available to them. Because if we do our
Mhm,
research, there is a lot of food opportunities for every species. And they don't need to have all of those opportunities in the same day. So you could be changing what their diet consists of, or you can change how you present it. And either way, it's going to be enriching to them. Even if they don't like it. I talked about this at ASA, but a negative response is still a response that's enriching. I mean,
mhm.
our lives aren't stress free, and that's still, it creates different challenges for us that we have to overcome, and that's the
Yeah,
same in our birds lives too. I think we think it only needs to be good things, but stress is an enriching thing too.
mhm. Absolutely, and I think that's hard for a lot of people, and I can tell you that I was at Nashville Zoo, and I was doing a presentation, and I said that I thought that stress was good, that it builds coping skills. It is enriching because it's not as long as it's not constant, continuous state of
Right.
stress.
There's
Um,
definitely
and
a
there is a limit, and you've gotta kind of be again, it goes back to being observant and being aware,
right.
but, the veterinarian told me absolutely not, it was not enriching, but that's because she was seeing sick animals, and so, no, you're not gonna do something stressful with a sick animal.
Yeah.
Um,
My perspective is it should be done on a healthy and mature individual. I mean, we don't want to stress a young bird out, and we don't want to stress an ill bird out, or a geriatric bird for that matter. I mean, there's a window where stress is more healthy than it is
right.
to other birds.
Well, and I think too, when you mentioned, like the stumps and things like that, that they might go around a stump or avoid something, that is enriching as well. It's not,
Yeah.
I put it in and the bird never went near it, actively avoided it, and to me, that's still a success.
Yeah, I mean, if they're actively avoiding it, then they noticed it. In my reality, there's a whole spectrum of your response on enrichment, and it's either
Mhm.
really good or really stressful. And if it's exactly in between where they didn't notice and didn't care at all, was it even enriching?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. It's the fact that there is some reaction.
Yeah.
Carrie wants everybody to know that she doesn't need any stress. She's geriatric. No, he was
No
talking about
comment.
the young birds, Carrie. That's what he was talking about. Um, all right. So locomote, dietary. Um, what's another category?
I gotta look at my notes again.
You got. I
Audit-
wrote it down and I can't read it. Say that
so
again.
there's a auditory, so
Okay.
sounds.
Yep.
Which is kind of part of their environmental enrichment, but it's a more specified version. So you see here we can do natural sounds. We all have those sleeping apps where it's rain sounds and things like that, or actual rain making the sounds. That's an enriching natural sound. Other wildlife making their vocalizations is an enriching natural sound. Bird song, since we're talking about birds, um, birds, even though they don't necessarily understand the other species, still are going to be enriched by listening to the other species. And then
Mhm,
I did conspecific vocalizations, which conspecific, to break it down, is basically just means another bird of the same species of the one in question. So
mhm,
and this goes back to the double-edged side of stress versus positive reaction. You can really get both out of a conspecific vocalization, because if it's breeding season for said individual and you play another dominant male sound, then he's
mhm,
not going to have a happy reaction, but he's really going to have a reaction, and I think that's still enriching too. And at the same time, if it's not that negative reaction, they just enjoy hearing their own species and sounds that they know what they mean.
mhm,
And then I was telling people at the conference too that I like to travel or go around feeding with music playing, and you even changing the genre of music that you listen to. We know that's enriching for us, because it's, we
mhm,
kind of get into a pattern of listening to the same music, and when we expose ourselves to new music, it's really enlightening. And it's the same for birds. I might listen to classic rock one day, or country another, or softer music some days, and more fast-paced, energetic music on other days. And that's mostly to my benefit, but it secondarily benefits the birds and is enriching to them
mhm.
too.
So you do my the people who listen on a regular basis know, that country music is not good for birds though, right?
My birds don't care.
Come on, work with me, TJ. I'm trying to get less people to listen to country music.
I'm getting a stance
Um,
on that one.
so, um, Douglas asked, "Would you recommend a babysitter video for all kinds of parrot songs?" I know that they do have them. I
Mhm.
have I have used them. I mean, honestly, I think you can find more and just, create like a mixtape. I don't know how old you are, Douglas, but create a mixtape of bird sounds. And I've the other thing I've done is playing. I've played predator sounds as well.
Yeah,
And again, you don't want to do it every day, all day, for any extended period of time. But I was
right.
in Holland and we had people had brought their birds to an event where we were speaking, and they were all kind of lined up at the back of the room. And I had this thing, it's called an identifier, and it's got these
Uh-huh.
little cards that you put in and you press a button and it plays different bird sounds. And I pressed the American bald eagle. Every single one of those birds was like, don't, no matter what they were doing. I mean, they
Yeah,
were at attention. And so
but they noticed it and
the
they responded to it.
exactly, exactly. Some of them were like, "Oh, okay," and they went back to what they were doing. Others were, very, "Oh, Wendy says her birds love country." All
See,
right, we'll let it pass.
they have
It's
to be
Minnesota.
just like
And cartoons. I mean, I think my opinion on the cartoons thing is that it's that high pitched sound. I think that's
yeah.
part of that. Um, but
And
yeah, I think any kind of
I've definitely played videos for birds before, and I
Mhm.
think that caters more into the pet bird side. I mean, none of
Yeah,
the birds out in our aviaries are going to have a positive reaction to a movie screen, but they might have a reaction, or they might not notice it at all. But pet
right.
birds definitely can benefit. It's the sound of human voices, even, and they're so conditioned to hearing humans that that can be good for them.
Yep. Um, so Doug says they've used the babysitter video with the gray and green wings, but never tried it in the aviary. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more beneficial, Douglas, I would say, to just have some auditory stuff going on.
Yeah,
So yeah. Um, all right, let's see. So we've got auditory, and I think auditory is a very like people forget about it, and it's such a simple one because, like you said, you
yeah,
can walk through the aviary, you can, clean cages, you can do whatever and have auditory enrichment going on.
yeah,
Uh, and
absolutely.
that's one of the things, you and I were talking about too with USDA and the regulations for USDA. Everybody kind of lost their mind over enrichment, that it was going to be, so hard to do. And something like the auditory is a very easy one.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and when you're
so
dealing with, we have over 100 aviaries out there, and if the USDA regulation was, they need this amount of toys per day, we'd be out. That just is
yeah,
not feasible for us.
yeah. But it's, the welfare is still good. They're still being enriched. They're just being enriched in a more natural, different way.
Yeah.
Um, so the other one, another category you've got is environmental.
Yeah, and so
Um,
that's kind of it's a very broad one, and I'm glad you brought up the list so everyone can see because I'll probably go through it quicker. And it goes back to that change of the environment with the plants. Even I mean that cater to both locomotive and environmental. And you'll notice a lot of enrichments can hit more than one category. Some of them can hit as many categories as you think of, but it's not it's not so black and white on is it environmental because auditory is a part of the environment too. It's just a
mhm,
more specified section that you can cater to. But with a lot of birds, a substrate change, you might have a wire floor on the bottom that they can't access a substrate, but do they have a nesting box or something similar that they could have it? And it's probably going to be wood shavings if it is a nest box, but try changing that to, a safe kind of fiber that they're not going to get tangled up in and ingest, like cocoa fiber, things like that. It can also be sand, and a lot of our birds will bathe in the sand too, depending on the species of
mhm,
bird. Browse, which we had already talked about a little bit earlier, is one of those that hits multiple categories because with parrots, they're going to use that as a dietary enrichment. They're
mhm,
also going to use it as perching, and get that locomote changing. And it's also environmental because you're changing the space around them. um, and with browse too, you can even add in like branches that have a natural fruit on them that is safe for your birds, and they
mhm,
can be foraging the whole time and keeping themselves busy. And then when they're done foraging the fruits, maybe they're going to pluck the leaves off and play with those, or break some
mhm,
sticks, or climb around on the branch itself. And these next ones kind of more apply to outdoor aviaries and breeding type setups with walk-in flights. New
mhm,
plants, removing plants like weeding, trimming, letting plants grow. I mean, there's a constant shift of things when you have a planted aviary that's under constant maintenance. With like water birds or birds that even just have access to a pool or a pond, a lot of us have parrots, and so with adding it into the pet side, you can put just a big bathing dish in the bottom and consider that
mhm,
your pond for this speaking. But cleaning that out and providing it with nice, fresh, clean water, the reaction you get out of that is really great. And then some birds, like flamingos and waterfowl, if that water is gross and full of mud, they actually probably get more enrichment out of that than they do a clean
mhm,
pond. But they're still going to go into that clean pond and immediately start bathing and cleaning themselves. Bathing is a big one you can focus towards because that is it's natural to every bird. You don't even have to
mhm,
ask me what kind. Bathing is very natural, whether it's to in a sand or an ashy kind of bath, or a pool, or a shallow puddle, or a small bowl. It doesn't really matter, just as long as they have access to that. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but they should have access to it on set occasion kind of thing. We use a lot of sprinklers over the top, which provides two benefits to us. We grow a lot of plants in the aviaries, and if you're going to go and water them all with a hose, then that's going to be your full time job. um, but with the sprinklers overhead, that basically creates a rainforest effect in there. It's like it's raining whenever we want it to. We can control their entire environment that way. And I don't think there's a bird. Well, I'm going to take that back to start with. Some birds actually don't like the rain effect, but that's your negative response, and they're going to get over it and they're going to have a reaction to it. The ocellated turkeys do not like a raining environment, and they're going to go and sit on their perch or sit underneath a little roof where they can sit nice and tight and dry until it's done with. Well, that's still enriching mentally to them. But the other
yeah.
birds are all going to, be out on either on the perch or on the ground if it's a ground bird with their wings open, bathing and cleaning themselves, and just having a really good reaction to that. It's like us, a shower feels good. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. A
Mhm.
shower feels good to everybody too, and that applies to our birds as well. One
Have
with the
you
breeding facility. What's that?
Go ahead. Have you ever done on-demand misters or on-demand showers?
So,
You
like
can
at a
build them. Go ahead.
Like at a set schedule to where it's rotates through, or when I want it to hit?
When the bird wants it to hit.
Oh, no, I haven't. I've seen videos of it set up, but I've never done it myself.
It's pretty cool. The only issue is if you've got birds that are susceptible to well, all birds are, but if you've got, bird like waterfowl, depending on what they're walking on, things like that,
Right.
that can be, detrimental if they end up standing in water. Um,
Yeah.
but it's a matter but it's where it's a motion detector, and then when the bird steps in front of it or moves in front of it, that's when the mist happens. It's kinda cool because
Right.
then there's a modicum of control that they have, so
Yeah.
that can be done, in a smaller setting as well.
Yeah, I've never done it myself, but I am fully in support of it. It sounds like a great idea. And anytime you give that bird choice and control to what it's
Mhm.
exposed to, they're going to start learning how to enrich themselves like we do with our own lives.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you and I were talking too about, allowing the birds, to be able to enrich themselves. So you're
Mhm.
providing it's like you provide the framework, and then because, I mean, with a companion parrot especially, you want that bird unless you are home 24/7, you want that bird to be able to, kind of keep itself busy while you're gone.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, your birds don't count on you for enrichment, do they? I mean,
Right.
providing the tools, but that's about it.
I provide it, but I myself am not necessarily the enrichment to them.
Right, right. And I think that's something so your last category is social. What are
Yeah.
we talking about as far as social is concerned?
So that's where it can come into human or bird. If we're talking about a pet bird, then I would say, even bringing family members or friends over, giving that novel human interaction, that's enriching, and it's a social enrichment for them because they kind of see themselves more as part of the flock with the humans than they would, with the birds. It depends on the pet bird too. That goes back to knowing your individual. Um,
Yeah.
but with a facility like ours, new bird introductions are a big one. Things are kind of always a constant shifting motion in a breeding environment. We have young birds getting used to the outside that might be moved next to a breeding pair. Well, that's enriching to the young birds as well as the breeding pair that is already accustomed to those conditions. But those individual birds are new to them, so that gives them something new. Mixing bird species, this applies across the board, whether you have pets or breeders or whatever. There's some level of interspecific interaction you can do. And that doesn't mean necessarily in the same enclosure, but like I can put a crowned pigeon next to a pheasant pigeon, and that's enriching to both of them, even though they're not
Mhm,
actually in the same aviary. Or like a lot of them, like I have starlings and barbets that fly over top of the crowned pigeons in the same environment. So
mhm,
that is in the same aviary, the interspecific interactions there. But as long as it's visible and audible to them, then that interaction is still there. It doesn't. You can consider the safety of both birds involved because not everyone gets along, and not everyone's ever going to get along.
mhm,
So consider that when you're doing it. Parrots pack a heck of a bite, so you don't want to put, a macaw and a cockatoo together, or even a macaw and a cockatiel. That's really not fair to the cockatiel at that point. Um, but even putting them next to each other at a safe,
mhm,
gap in between them, they're still going to be able to communicate with each other, look what the other one's doing, watching that other one's
mhm,
habits and how it moves throughout its aviary and uses its environment. Even if the one bird sits on the perch the whole time watching and the other one's doing all the interaction around, they're still both getting enriched from that. Um,
mhm,
and then, so that's along with the neighboring enclosure parts. And it doesn't even have to be birds. A lot of us have dogs around our birds. That's enriching to both the dog and the birds. I
mhm,
keep tortoises in the same enclosure as some of the birds. And then the tortoises really do some damage on the vegetation, which I like because I don't have to weed that enclosure. um, but it's enriching to those birds housed there because chances are they've not even seen a tortoise before. Pictured
mhm,
here is Bernard, and every once in a while, Bernard will just come running to me when I go to open one of the aviary doors, and I'll let him go right past me and down the hallway, and just him walking down that hallway and back is something that's unfamiliar, and it's really interactive for everyone involved. He's watching the birds' reaction and the birds were watching him the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the whole, side by side is really, something that people can absolutely do if they have more than one bird. And I think, have you ever used that, as far as modeling behavior is concerned? If somebody gets a new bird, they want that bird to start, either playing more or eating something, a specific food. Sometimes when you put a bird next to that less experienced bird, they'll pick up that behavior. Have you ever used that technique? Yeah.
To an extent, it's a little I don't run into the issue as much with the species I work with, but like parrots
Mhm,
are going to be a lot more specific to that. But it's
mhm,
definitely beneficial. Say if you're doing pine cone toys or whatever, and this younger, inexperienced bird just thinks that that's something sitting on the ground or sitting next to a perch or is skewered to the wall or whatever. He might not even know that he's supposed to be doing anything with that, and you might have an
right.
older bird next to it that has been waiting for that pine cone or whatever, and he's going to know exactly
Mhm,
what to do, immediately go and shred it apart, get whatever treats might have been in there, that kind of thing. And they will pick up on it from each other, just as we learn from each other from observation as well.
right. Eva says she has an Amazon and a macaw around the corner from each other who encourage each other during their showers. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and it's because they are a lot of these birds are flock animals, and so they're
yeah,
used to having, they're not used to being solitary,
right,
which is not an excuse to go out and get more birds. I always tell people that.
yeah,
It's you have become the flock in a pet setting. Um,
right.
but so one last question, TJ. Um,
Uh-huh.
we didn't get to everything we were going to talk about, but um, so how if you're going to rate your enrichment, how do you rate it a success or a failure? How does that work?
That kind of goes back to a little bit that we talked about. I actually use Google Sheets where it's actually printed up in front of me and I can track the interaction and all of that and their response to it, as you can
Hmm.
see here. So I have three options, and it's negative, neutral, or positive. If the bird liked it, that's positive. If it had no reaction, neutral. If it was scared of it or hated it or was mad about it, then that's the negative reaction. And
Hmm.
so I would rate it as a failure if it's hitting neutral consistently. Don't give up after one try with something, but
Right.
if it's consistently in the neutral column, then that's a failure for that bird and that enrichment
Hmm.
device for that bird. So you can see on the graph next to it that it neutral is the yellow color. So I just have an example sheet up there. I have a lot of positive interaction, but it's not all positive. The red is the negative interaction, and that's still enriching to
Hmm.
them as well.
Nice. And yeah, I think it's important that people hear that don't just, try it once and give it up.
Yeah.
I think that's important. So we've got Carrie says we need to do another episode. So
What
I'll
Carrie says
invite you now.
goes.
What?
So what Carrie says goes.
Absolutely true. Yeah, and Nancy says all her birds went off one day when a native box turtle showed up. So that it was enriching though. There was a response to that. Um, But I wanna thank you. I mean, I think we could get into each category more deeply, and I would love to have you back, if you'd be willing.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and then Bart thinks you need to visit. I don't know if Bart's talking to you or me, but I think we both need to visit.
Sounds like
So I
it.
wanna thank you again, and we will definitely, be having you back if you're willing to do so. So,
Absolutely, and thank you for having me for this one. I really appreciate it.
thank you, and I want to thank everybody who listened and who, watched tonight. If you've got somebody in the bird world that you'd like to hear from, let me know. I'm willing to ask anybody. I'll talk to anybody. You guys know that by now. But I'll reach out to them and see what we can do. And just a reminder, our next foraging flock meeting is the 20th of November. That's the membership group. So if you're a member, I will be sending out a link for that. And so there's still time, to join. But again, I want to thank TJ, and you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. And we will see you all soon. Take it easy. Bye bye.
Bye.